The first time Julian Hart saw his wife, she was lying in a hospital bed, pale as moonlight, beautiful enough to make the entire room feel too quiet. And she was in a coma. Sign here, the lawyer said, pushing the marriage papers across the polished table. Julian looked at the name printed beside his. Vivian Lancaster, the youngest female CEO in Lancaster Group history. Cold, brilliant, untouchable. And now his wife. Everyone in the room thought he was marrying her for money. Her uncle looked at him with open contempt. Her cousins whispered behind their hands. Even the family doctor avoided meeting his eyes, as if Julian had already committed some shameful crime by existing near her. Only Vivian remained silent because Vivian could not wake up. Julian picked up the pen. His fingers paused for only 1 second. Then he signed. From that moment on, the world called him shameless. A poor man marrying a Kameomeosaurus. A nobody climbing into the Lancaster family by using a dying woman. A joke. Julian heard all of it. He simply lowered his eyes, took the marriage certificate, and said, "From today on, I'm her husband." Vivian's uncle laughed coldly. "Husband? Don't flatter yourself. You're just a temporary name on paper. Once she dies." The pen in Julian's hand snapped. The room went still. He lifted his gaze. Slowly. His voice was calm. But something dangerous hid underneath it. "She won't die." The uncle's smile froze. Julian stood, walked to Vivian's bedside, and gently tucked the blanket higher over her shoulder. His movement was so careful that even the nurse stared. A man who had just broken a pin, with one hand touched the sleeping woman, like she was made of snow. "She's my wife," Julian said. "Speak carefully." That was the first time the Lancaster family realized something was wrong. This man was not as weak as he looked. That night, Julian moved into Vivian's private hospital suite. It was absurdly luxurious. A separate living area. A balcony overlooking the city. Fresh flowers changed daily. Silent nurses outside the door. But Julian ignored all of it. He sat beside Vivian's bed, rolled up his sleeves, and read through her medical reports one by one. The doctor said softly, "Mr. Vale, Miss Lancaster's condition is stable, but there has been no sign of consciousness for 3 months. You should prepare yourself." Julian did not look up. "I don't prepare for losing." The doctor paused. Julian turned one page. "I prepare for winning." After the doctor left, the room became quiet again. Vivian slept on. Her long black hair spread across the pillow. Her lashes cast faint shadows beneath her eyes. Even unconscious, she looked distant and proud, like a queen refusing to bow even in dreams. Julian watched her for a long time. Then he leaned back and laughed softly. "You really haven't changed." "Of course." She gave no response. He rested his elbow on the bed rail and looked at her face. "Vivian Lancaster," he murmured. "Do you remember me?" No answer. "You probably don't." His smile faded a little. 7 years ago at Westbridge University. You lent an umbrella to a boy standing in the rain." The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily. Julian's voice became softer. "That boy had no money, no family worth mentioning, and only one interview suit. The rain ruined everything. He thought his life was over before it even began." He reached out but stopped before touching her hand. "And then you walked over." His throat tightened. "You didn't ask his name. You didn't pity him. You just gave him the umbrella and said, 'People who are trying hard shouldn't look so defeated.'" Julian lowered his eyes. "You were my first love." Outside the window, the city lights shimmered. Inside the room, the sleeping CEO remained silent. Julian laughed at himself. Ridiculous. Right? I married my first love while she couldn't even reject me. He finally touched her hand. Her fingers were cold. He wrapped them carefully in both of his palms. Don't worry, he whispered. When you wake up, if you hate this marriage, I'll let you go. His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. But before that, I'll protect you. A long silence passed. Then Julian lowered his voice even more. Even if the whole world thinks I don't deserve you. He bent down and pressed his forehead lightly against the back of her hand. You saved me once. Let me save you this time. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Julian fell asleep beside her bed. His hand was still holding hers. The next morning, the nurse came in and nearly dropped the medicine tray because Vivian Lancaster's fingers had moved very slightly, almost like she had tried to hold him back. But when Julian woke, Vivian was still asleep. The doctor said it might have been a reflex. Julian said nothing. He only looked at Vivian. Then, for the first time since signing the papers, he smiled. A real smile. Still pretending. He whispered near her ear. Fine. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'll wait. 3 days later, Lancaster Group held an emergency board meeting. Vivian's uncle tried to remove her as CEO permanently. The proposal was almost passed until Julian walked into the boardroom. Everyone turned. He wore a black suit. Simple, but perfectly fitted. His expression was cold. In his hand was a folder thick with documents. Vivian's uncle sneered. Who let you in? Julian looked at him. Vivian Lancaster's husband. Someone laughed. A paper husband. Julian placed the folder on the table. Then let this paper husband remind you. According to Vivian's pre-AC voting trust, her legal spouse holds temporary protective authority over her shares. If she becomes medically incapacitated. The room fell silent. The uncle's face changed. Impossible. Julian opened the folder. Your proposal to remove her as CEO is rejected. He turned to the directors, and from today on, anyone who tries to touch what belongs to my wife, his eyes darkened, will answer to me. No. One laughed this time. By evening, the news had spread through the company. The useless husband had blocked the board. The man everyone mocked had protected Vivian's position. When Julian returned to the hospital, he was exhausted. But the moment he entered Vivian's room, his expression softened. He loosened his tie and sat beside her. Your relatives are annoying, he said. No response. Julian sighed. You owe me dinner when you wake up. Still no response. He leaned closer. And don't think I didn't notice. Your fingers moved that morning. The monitor beeped. Julian narrowed his eyes. Vivian Lancaster. Are you secretly listening? Silence. He stared at her. Then deliberately he said, actually, since you're asleep, I can say anything, right? He leaned back, pretending to think. My first love was cold, arrogant, hard to approach. Still, nothing, but she was also kind. His voice softened. She probably forgot she once saved a poor boy in the rain. Julian looked at her sleeping face, and his smile became tender. But he remembered. For 7 years, the room was warm and quiet. He stood to adjust her blanket. Just as he bent down, a hand suddenly caught his wrist. Julian froze. The grip was weak, but real. Slowly, he looked down. Vivian Lancaster's eyes were open, dark, clear, and staring straight at him. For one breath, neither of them moved. Then Vivian's dry lips parted. Her voice was barely a whisper. First, love. Julian's heart slammed against his ribs. Vivian's fingers tightened around his wrist. The cold comes CEO, everyone thought would never wake again, looked at her newlywed husband and said, in a voice that was weak but dangerously calm. Who gave you permission to let me go? Julian forgot how to breathe. Vivian pulled with the little strength she had. He leaned closer instinctively. Too close. Close enough that her breath touched his chin. Her gaze dropped to his lips, then rose again. Even pale and weak, her eyes still carried the pressure of a queen. You married me, she whispered. Now take responsibility. Julian stared at her. Then Vivian used both hands, grabbed his collar, and pulled him down. He barely managed to brace one arm beside her pillow. Their faces were inches apart. Her voice was soft, possessive, a little angry, and somehow sweet enough to ruin him. Julian Hart, she said. Your first love is awake. For a full 10 seconds, Julian forgot how to breathe. Vivian's fingers were still gripping his collar. Weak, soft, yet impossible to escape. The monitors beside the bed suddenly began beeping faster. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room almost immediately. Miss Lancaster, she's awake. Check her pupils. Blood pressure is rising. Everyone surrounded the bed. Only Julian stepped back. He had waited 98 days for this moment. Now that it had finally arrived, he strangely didn't know where to put his hands. He simply stood quietly by the window, watching the medical team examine the woman who had occupied every corner of his heart for 7 years. Miracle. The chief physician looked at the charts in disbelief. All indicators are recovering. He looked at Vivian. Miss Lancaster, do you remember what happened? Vivian answered calmly. Car accident. And your name? Vivian Lancaster. Current year. She answered. Perfectly. The doctor smiled. Excellent. What about him? He pointed toward Julian. Vivian slowly turned her head. Those beautiful dark eyes landed on Julian. She looked at him for several seconds, long enough to make Julian's heartbeat become completely irregular. Then I remember. She smiled faintly. My husband. The room instantly became silent. The nurses secretly exchanged excited looks. Julian almost thought he had misheard. Husband. She called him husband. The doctor laughed. It seems your memory is intact. Vivian nodded. It is. She looked at Julian again. Come here. It wasn't loud, but Julian obeyed. Immediately, he walked to the bedside. What is it? Vivian looked up at him. Her voice remained weak after months in a coma. You moved away. I thought the doctors needed space. I need you more. The room became strangely quiet again. Several young nurses silently bit their lips to stop themselves from smiling. The chief physician coughed awkwardly. It seems Miss Lancaster has recovered. Emotionally as well. Vivian didn't deny it. Instead, she reached out and Julian instinctively placed his hand into hers. She intertwined their fingers, naturally as if she had done it thousands of times. Only she knew this was the first time. His palm was warm, much warmer than she had imagined while lying unconscious for months. Because, yes, she had heard everything. Not every conversation, not every sound, but every night. A familiar voice would patiently tell her about the outside world. Sometimes he read financial reports, sometimes novels, sometimes complained about how difficult her relatives were, sometimes quietly admitted things he would never dare say if she were awake. Especially that rainy afternoon 7 years ago. Especially you were my first love. She had heard every word. She simply couldn't open her eyes. At that time, she had desperately wanted to wake up to tell him, you idiot, you were mine first, but her body refused to move. So, she waited until today. Now, he was finally standing beside her. Exactly where he belonged. After another hour of examinations, the doctors finally allowed everyone to leave. Only Julian remained. The room became peaceful again. He poured a glass of warm water. Slowly. I know. He carefully supported her shoulders. Before he could react, Vivian leaned naturally against his chest. Julian froze comfortable. She looked up innocently. My muscles are weak, so my husband can hold me. His ears immediately turned red. Vivian noticed. Interesting. Very interesting. The man who had stood against an entire board of directors without blinking couldn't survive one sentence from her. She almost laughed. Instead, she obediently drank the water. Halfway through, a drop rolled down her chin. Julian instinctively wiped it away with his thumb. His movement was so gentle, as if touching something infinitely precious. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Time itself seemed slower. Finally, Julian realized what he had done. He immediately withdrew his hand. Sorry for what? You took care of me for 3 months. She tilted her head slightly. Now you're embarrassed because you touched my face. He couldn't answer. She smiled very slightly. Only for him. That afternoon, members of the Lancaster family arrived. Almost 10 of them. Flowers, gifts, fake smiles. Her uncle stepped forward first. Vivian, thank goodness you've recovered. She looked at him expressionlessly. Really? Of course. I heard someone wanted to replace me as CEO. His smile stiffened. You misunderstood. I never misunderstand. Financial reports. Silence. The atmosphere immediately became awkward. Her cousin suddenly pointed toward Julian. This outsider has been interfering in company matters. He even stopped the board meeting. Several relatives nodded immediately. Exactly. He has no right. Before Julian could speak, Vivian calmly asked, who says he doesn't? Everyone looked at her. She slowly reached out. Her fingers found Julian's hand. Then she held it tightly. He is my husband. So everything that belongs to me. She looked directly at her uncle belongs to him, too. The room exploded. No one expected Vivian Lancaster, the legendary Ice Queen, to publicly protect a man. Her uncle's face darkened. Vivian, don't be emotional. Imperfectly rational. She leaned comfortably against Julian's arm. My husband protected my company. You tried to steal it. No one dared. The conversation. One by one, the relatives left. The room finally became quiet. Again, Julian looked down. Vivian. Him. You didn't have to do that. She blinked. Do what? Protect me. She stared at him. Then suddenly asked, when someone bullied me, you stood in front of me. When someone wanted my company, you fought them. When I couldn't even open my eyes, you stayed. She smiled softly. So, my turn. Julian looked at her without speaking. His chest felt strangely warm. He had imagined thousands of versions of Vivian waking up. None of them looked like this. None of them were so unbearably sweet. That evening, the nurse delivered dinner. Only one bowl of soup. One spoon. Julian frowned. I'll ask them for another. No. Vivian stopped him. I don't want another. Then how? She picked up the spoon, scooped a little soup, blew on it carefully, then held it toward him. Open. Vivian, you forgot what? You didn't eat lunch because of me. She remembered even that. Julian slowly opened his mouth. The soup wasn't particularly delicious, but somehow it became the best thing he had tasted in years. Seeing him finish the spoonful, Vivian smiled with satisfaction. My turn. Julian silently took the spoon. Open. This time, he fed her. The distance between them grew shorter with every spoonful. By the end of dinner, neither of them noticed they were smiling. Late that night, rain began falling outside. Julian was preparing to sleep on the sofa again. Just like every night during the past 3 months. Julian HM. The sofa looks uncomfortable. It's fine. It isn't. He smiled. I've gotten used to it. She looked at him quietly, then patted the empty side of the hospital bed. Come here. His breathing stopped. Vivian. Not asking twice. He hesitated for several long seconds. Finally, he carefully lay down on the edge of the oversized medical bed, leaving almost all the space to her, as if afraid touching her would somehow be disrespectful. Vivian looked at the ridiculous distance between them. You're avoiding me. I'm afraid I'll hurt you. She sighed softly. Then she moved until her forehead rested lightly against his shoulder. Julian froze completely. You won't. She closed her eyes. Her voice became softer than the rain outside. I finally found you. Not letting you sleep so far away anymore. Julian slowly raised one hand. After hesitating, he gently wrapped an arm around her very carefully, very protectively, almost reverently. Vivian smiled against his shoulder, then whispered something only he could hear. You said your first love saved you once. So, she lifted her head. Their noses were only inches apart. What if I tell you, my first love has always been you? The rain continued falling outside the window. Inside the quiet hospital room, Julian's heartbeat was louder than the storm. The next morning, Julian woke up with Vivian in his arms. For several seconds, he did not move. Her forehead rested against his shoulder. One hand lightly clutched the front of the shirt, as if even in sleep, she was afraid he might leave. Julian looked down at her, the famous Ice Queen of Lancaster Group, the woman who could make directors tremble with one look. Now, sleeping quietly against him like a spoiled cat, his lips curved. Then, Vivian opened her eyes. They stared at each other at close distance. Neither spoke. Finally, Vivian asked harshly, Did you sleep well? Julian's voice was low. Better than I should have. Her fingers tightened on his shirt. Then stay tomorrow, too. He paused. Vivian. What? You just woke up. So, you should be careful. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Careful of what? His gaze drifted away. Me. For one moment, Vivian was stunned. Then she smiled. Not the cold CEO's smile she gave outsiders. A real smile. Soft, dangerous, sweet. Julian Hart. She whispered. Do you think I woke up just to be careful of you? His throat moved. Before he could answer, she suddenly leaned closer. Her lips almost brushed his ear. I woke up to take back what's mine. Julian's entire body went stiff. Vivian looked satisfied. Just then, the door opened. The nurse came in with breakfast. Then, froze. Julian was half lying on the bed. Vivian was in his arms. The blanket covered both of them. The nurse's eyes widened. I am sorry. She turned around so fast she almost hit the wall. Vivian remained calm. Julian immediately sat up. It's not what you think. The nurse nodded wildly without turning back. Yes. Of course. Mr. Hart. I understand. Vivian slowly added. No, it is what she thinks. Julian. The nurse ran out, smiling. By noon, everyone in the VIP ward knew Miss Lancaster had woken up, and the first thing she did was cling to her husband. Vivian recovered faster than expected. 3 days later, she could sit up for longer periods. 1 week later, she could stand with support. But she refused almost everyone's help, except Julian's. When the physical therapist reached out, Vivian said calmly, No. The therapist froze. Julian sighed. Vivian. She looked at him. You. So Julian had to stand beside her, one hand holding her waist, the other supporting her arm. Her body was still weak. Every step was slow, but her expression remained stubborn. Julian lowered his voice. You can lean on me. I am. You're barely touching me. I'm afraid I'll get used to it. He paused. Vivian looked ahead, pretending not to care. If I get used to you holding me, what if you run away later? Julian's grip tightened slightly around her waist. I want. She looked at him. Promise. His eyes darkened. I waited 7 years. Do you think I'd run after 7 days? Her ears turned red. Julian noticed. This time it was his turn to smile. CEO Lancaster. Are you shy? No, you're red. That's recovery. Your ears are recovering, too. She stepped on his foot. Not hard. Just enough to punish him. Julian laughed. The therapist silently looked away. She had worked in this hospital for 9 years. This was the first time she had seen someone do rehabilitation like flirting. That afternoon, Vivian received company documents. Julian tried to take them away. You need rest. I need control. You just woke up and my company almost got stolen while I was asleep. His expression cooled. That won't happen again. Vivian looked at him. For some reason, those 5 words made her heart hurt. This man had been mocked, doubted, and insulted for months, but he never defended himself. Only when someone hurt her did he show his edge. She put down the documents. Come here. Julian walked closer. She lifted her arms. He stared. What? Hug? You said that won't happen again? Yes. Then give me proof. Julian looked at her for a moment, then bent down and carefully hugged her. Vivian's arms wrapped around his neck. Her voice was soft beside his ear. Julian Ham, were you lonely when I wouldn't wake up? His body still for a long time. He did not answer. Then he said lightly, a little liar. Vivian closed her eyes. She had heard him on many nights. His voice rough from exhaustion, his hand holding hers. Sometimes he would say nothing for hours. Sometimes he would whisper, wake up. I'm running out of things to tell you. Sometimes he would laugh and say, you're really cruel. You made me fall in love once, then made me wait 7 years, then made me become your husband while you slept. She had heard it all, so she hugged him tighter. Then from now on, he'll talk to you every day. Julian's jaw tightened. Even if you're busy, even if I'm angry, even if we fight. She thought seriously. Then I'll talk louder. He laughed. Vivian leaned back and looked at him. Why are you laughing? Because you're cute. The room became silent. Vivian froze. Julian also froze. He had not meant to say it out loud, but it was too late. Vivian stared at him, then slowly looked away. I'm not cute. Julian's smile deepened. No, I'm dignified. Yes, cold, very terrifying to others. Her eyes returned to him. Julian lowered his voice. To me. You're cute. Vivian's heart skipped. Outside the window, sunlight fell across his face. For the first time, she realized something dangerous. Julian Hart was not only gentle, he was also very good at making her lose control. 2 weeks later, Vivian insisted on leaving the hospital. The doctor objected. The board objected. Julian objected most strongly. No. Vivian sat on the bed, already dressed in a white blouse and long black skirt. Her hair was tied behind her neck. Her face was still a little pale, but her eyes had recovered their sharpness. I'm going. You can't even walk for more than 10 minutes. I have you. That is not a medical plan. It's my plan. Julian folded his arms. Rejected. Vivian looked at him quietly. Then she lowered her eyes. Fine. Julian immediately felt something was wrong. Vivian. She turned her face away. I thought my husband would support me. Don't use that tone. What tone? The one that makes me feel guilty. She whispered. So you do feel guilty? Julian closed his eyes. 3 seconds later, he lost. The next morning, Vivian returned to Lancaster Group, but not in the way anyone expected, because the moment she stepped out of the car, her knees weakened. Julian caught her immediately. A crowd of employees had gathered at the entrance. Reporters were outside the security line. Cameras flashed. Vivian whispered, "Put me down." Julian looked at her pale face. "No, there are cameras. Let them film." Julian. He bent down. Then, in front of employees, reporters, and half the city's business media, Julian lifted Vivian into his arms. A Princess Carrie. The crowd gasped. Vivian's eyes widened. "You're insane." His jaw was tense. "You're shaking. I can walk. You can also faint. In the CEO and in your husband." That sentence was not loud, but everyone nearby heard it. The cameras flashed even harder. Vivian buried her face against his chest, not because she was afraid, because she was smiling. No one saw it except Julian. He looked down, still angry. Her voice was muffled a little. "Then punished me later." She froze. He realized what he had said, but this time he did not take it back. Vivian slowly lifted her head. Her ears were red again. "You're getting bold." Julian carried her through the Lancaster Group lobby under everyone's stunned gaze. His voice was low. "Meant only for her. I learned from my wife." That day, the entire company exploded. The CEO was back. Her husband carried her into the building. The same husband everyone had mocked. The same man who had protected her shares. The same man who now dared to ignore reporters, directors, and gossip because his wife looked tired. In the executive meeting, Vivian sat at the head of the table. Julian stood behind her. Her uncle tried one last time. "Vivian, even if you've recovered your physical condition, my physical condition is none of your concern. You can't let an outsider interfere with Lancaster Group." Vivian smiled coldly. "Outsider." She reached back without looking. Julian naturally placed his hand in hers. Every director saw it. Vivian said calmly, "Let me introduce him again. My husband, Julian Hart. And from today on, if anyone in this room disrespects him," her gaze swept across the table, "you can resign." No one dared breathe. Julian looked down at their joint hands. His heart softened completely. She was protecting him again publicly, proudly, without hesitation. The meeting ended in 30 minutes. Efficient, ruthless, very Vivian. But the moment everyone left, her shoulders relaxed. Julian immediately stepped forward. "Tired?" "No." He touched her forehead. She didn't dodge. "You're warm." "Maybe because someone carried me in front of hundreds of employees." "So you admit you were embarrassed?" "No." "Then why are your ears red again?" Vivian grabbed his tie. Julian lowered his head. Their faces came close. She stared at him. "Mr. Hart, do you enjoy teasing a patient?" He smiled. "I enjoy teasing my wife." Her fingers tightened around his tie. For a second, the air changed. Warm, slow, dangerous. Then Vivian suddenly pulled. Julian's hands pressed against the armrests of her chair. He was trapped. Above her, she looked up at him. Lips curved. "Be careful." Her voice was soft. "I'm recovering fast." Julian's gaze darkened. "How fast?" Vivian tilted her head. "Fast enough." Her eyes dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes to settle accounts with the man who said, "Had let me go." Julian's breathing became heavier. "Vivian." She smiled. "Call me that again." "What? My name?" He stared at her, then said hoarsely, "Vivian." Her smile softened. She released his tie and gently touched his jaw. "Good. Then," she whispered, "from now on, you're not allowed to leave my sight without permission." The first thing Vivian Lancaster did after returning to Lancaster Group was fire 3 directors. The second thing she did was change Julian's access level. The third thing she did was make the entire executive floor understand one rule: Julian Hart was not a guest. He was not a decoration. He was not the coma husband people whispered about behind closed doors. He was her husband. And Vivian Lancaster protected what was hers. At 9 a.m., the executive conference room was already full. Directors sat along the long table pretending to review documents while secretly watching the door. Everyone had heard about yesterday, the Princess Carrie, the cameras, the CEO being carried into the company lobby, her husband like something out of a romance drama. Some people found it sweet, some found it shocking, some found it dangerous because Vivian Lancaster had always been known as a woman who needed no one. And now she had returned with a man standing beside her. At exactly 9:03, the door opened. Vivian entered first. White blouse, black pencil skirt, hair pinned up, expression cold. She looked every inch the CEO who had once made billion-dollar negotiations feel like routine paperwork. Julian followed behind her. Simple dark suit, calm eyes, one hand holding a leather folder. His presence was quiet, but no one could ignore him. Vivian sat at the head of the table. Julian stood beside her. A director cleared his throat. "Miss Lancaster, welcome back." Vivian glanced at him. "Thank you." Another director smiled politely. "Or perhaps we should say Mrs. Lancaster now." A few people chuckled. It was not a kind joke. Julian's eyes cooled before he could speak. Vivian lifted her gaze. The room went silent. "Miss Lancaster is fine." The director smiled, thinking he had one. Then Vivian reached her hand out without looking. Julian paused for half a second, then placed his hand in hers. Their fingers interlocked naturally. Vivian leaned back in her chair. "Or Mrs. Hart." The entire conference room froze. Julian's heartbeat missed once. Vivian's expression did not change. She looked around the room calmly. "If you insist on using a married title, use the correct one." No one spoke. The director's face turned red. Julian lowered his eyes to their joined hands. Her palm was cool, but her grip was firm, as if she was telling the whole world, "He is mine, and I am not ashamed." The meeting began. Vivian was ruthless. Every report she opened, she found a problem. Every excuse someone gave, she cut through it. With one sentence, a director tried to push responsibility onto a department head. Vivian said, "You approved the budget." Another tried to say the market had changed. Vivian said, "So did the data." You ignored both. Her uncle remained silent for 20 minutes. Finally, he spoke. "Vivian, your recovery is important. Perhaps you should appoint someone to assist you." Vivian looked at him. "I already have someone." Her uncle's eyes flicked toward Julian. "You mean him?" The word carried obvious contempt. Julian looked calm, but Vivian's hand tightened. "Yes," she said. Her uncle laughed softly with respect. "He has no experience managing Lancaster Group." With respect, Vivian replied coldly, "Neither did you when you tried to steal it." The room became deathly quiet. Her uncle's smile vanished. Vivian opened another folder. During my coma, Director Lancaster authorized 3 emergency transfers without board approval. She pushed the documents forward. Explain. Her uncle's face darkened. That was for company stability. Then why did 2 transfers go to shell companies? Connected to your private accounts? No. One dared breathe. Julian stood beside her, watching every expression. He had known Vivian was powerful, but seeing her like this, awake, sharp, untouchable, he suddenly understood why the business world feared her and why he had fallen for her even harder. Her uncle tried to speak. Vivian cut him off. You have 2 choices. She tapped the table once. Resign quietly or I hand this to legal before lunch. Her uncle stood abruptly. You would do this to family. Vivian's eyes were icy. Family doesn't steal from me while in dying. The word dying made Julian's jaw tighten. Vivian felt it without turning. She lightly rubbed his thumb with hers. A tiny movement hidden under the table. No one else saw, but Julian did. His anger softened immediately. She was still comforting him even while destroying her enemies. Her uncle looked at Julian. This is because of him, isn't it? Vivian's face became colder. Be careful, he sneered. You woke up and immediately trusted a man who married you while you couldn't even open your eyes. Do you really think he loves you? The air changed. Julian finally looked at him. There was no anger on his face, only a calm so sharp it frightened people more. But Vivian spoke first. Enough. Her voice was not loud. Yet, everyone straightened. She stood. Julian immediately reached out to support her. She accepted his hand without hesitation. Then she looked at her uncle. You can question my judgment. You can question my strategy. You can even question my ability to return. Her eyes darkened. But you do not question my husband. Her uncle froze. Vivian continued slowly. He protected my shares. He protected my position. He protected me when I couldn't protect myself. She lifted their joined hands slightly. So, let me say this once. Her gaze swept across every person in the room. Respect him. A pause. He's my husband. Julian looked at her for a moment. The conference room disappeared. The directors disappeared. The company disappeared. All he saw was Vivian, the girl from the rainy day, the sleeping bride, the CEO who had woken up and chosen him in front of everyone. His chest fell full, too full, as if 7 years of loneliness had finally found somewhere to rest. The meeting ended with 3 resignations. By noon, the entire company knew CEO Lancaster had returned, and she had publicly defended her husband, not once, not subtly, in front of the board. By 2 p.m., the company group chats were exploding. Did you hear? She said. Mrs. Hart. Mrs. Hart. Our CEO said that Mr. Hart didn't even smile, but his ears were red. CEO saw someone disrespect him and almost froze the whole room. Who said this was a loveless marriage? The whole executive floor is eating sugar today. Julian knew none of this. He was in Vivian's office watching her sign documents with one hand while the other hand rested under the desk holding his. He looked down. Vivian. She did not look up. You need both hands to work. In using one. That's inefficient. I'm the CEO. I decide what's efficient. He sighed. You're impossible. She finally looked up. Are you complaining? No. Good. She squeezed his hand. Then stay. Julian's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She returned to her documents completely calm, as if holding her husband's hand, while approving a quarterly restructuring plan was normal CEO behavior. After a while, Julian said, Quietly. You didn't have to say Mrs. Hart. Vivian paused. Then she put down her pen. Did you dislike it? No. Then his voice lowered. I just didn't expect you to say it. She watched him. For a moment. Julian. He looked at her. I was asleep for 3 months. I know. But I heard people call you shameless. His expression changed. I heard them say you were using me. Vivian. I heard them laugh at you. Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around his and I couldn't open my eyes. Julian's heart sank. She had heard that too. Vivian looked at him. So now that I can speak, I will speak clearly. Her eyes softened. I don't want anyone to think you're unwanted. Julian went completely still. For 7 years, he had been very good at enduring poverty, enduring humiliation, enduring loneliness, enduring the knowledge that the woman he loved existed in a world far above his reach. But this sentence, I don't want anyone to think you're unwanted, it struck somewhere he had never allowed anyone to touch. Vivian saw the change in his eyes. She stood slowly. Her legs were still weak. Julian immediately reached for her waist. Careful. She used his arm for balance and stepped closer. Then she raised one hand and gently touched his face. You were never unwanted. His throat tightened. She smiled faintly. At least not by me. Julian stared at her. Then he lowered his head. Not kissing her. Not crossing that line. Just pressing his forehead lightly against hers. A quiet, intimate surrender. Vivian closed her eyes. For once, the CEO did not need to be strong. For once, Julian did not need to pretend he was fine. They simply stood there in the afternoon sunlight, breathing the same air outside the office. Vivian's secretary, Lena, raised a hand to knock. Then she saw the scene through the half-open door. She froze. 3 seconds later, she silently backed away. A junior assistant whispered, Should we remind CEO about the 3 p.m. meeting? Lena looked at her like she was insane. Do you enjoy unemployment? The assistant immediately shook her head. Lena adjusted her glasses. Delay at 10 minutes. Reason. Lena glanced at the office again. Inside, Vivian was still standing close to Julian. Julian had taken off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders without even thinking. Vivian's fingers were still holding the edge of his sleeve. Lena sighed. Reason CEO is busy. The assistant blinked. With what? Lena said expressionlessly. Being married that evening. Julian tried to leave the office early. Vivian looked up. Immediately. Where are you going? Home. This is home. 2. This is an office. You're here. Julian paused. Vivian looked back down at her documents. As long as you're here, it counts. He stood there for a few seconds, then smiled helplessly. I'll make you tea. Warm. I know. Less sugar. I know. And don't leave for too long. Julian looked at her. Vivian's ears turned slightly red, but she kept her face calm. What? He said softly. Nothing. He walked to the lounge and made tea. When he returned, Vivian had fallen asleep at her desk. Her pen was still in her fingers. Her brows were faintly furrowed, as if even in sleep she was thinking about work. Julian's smile faded. He walked over, gently took the pen from her hand, and placed it aside. Then he crouched beside her. Vivian. She did not wake. He touched her forehead. No fever. Just exhausted. He let out a quiet breath, then carefully lifted her into his arms. A Princess Carrie. Vivian stirred slightly. Julian. I'm here. Meeting cancelled. She frowned weakly. Who said? I did? She opened her eyes a little. You're getting bold. Mr. Hart. He looked down at her. You taught me, Mrs. Hart. Her lips curved. Then she leaned her head against his chest. Then carry me home. Julian held her closer. Always. When they passed through the executive floor, every employee lowered their head and pretended not to look. But after the elevator doors closed, the entire floor went silent for 2 seconds. Then exploded. CEO fell asleep in his arms. He led the meeting. She called him Mr. Hart. He called her Mrs. Hart. Lena stood among them holding a stack of documents. She looked at the closed elevator doors and sighed deeply. Then she opened the company group chat and typed only one sentence. The whole world knows he spoils her now. 3 floors below, inside the private elevator, Vivian was still in Julian's arms. Her voice was drowsy. Julian did I protect you well today? His heart softened. He looked down at the woman in his arms, the CEO who had faced the board without fear, the wife who still wanted to know if she had done enough for him. He lowered his voice. Yes. Vivian's eyes closed again. Good. After a moment, she murmured, because next time, her fingers curled lightly against his shirt. I'll protect you even better. 3 weeks after Vivian returned to work, Lancaster Group held its annual charity gala. Every major business leader in the city was invited. Celebrities, investors, media, even international partners. It was Vivian's first public appearance since waking from her coma. By 6 o'clock in the evening, flashes from dozens of cameras illuminated the entrance. Luxury cars arrived one after another when a black Rolls-Royce stopped at the red carpet. Every reporter instinctively raised a camera. The rear door opened. Julian stepped out first. A perfectly tailored black tuxedo made him look taller than usual. He adjusted his cuff links, then naturally turned back toward the car. Instead of walking away, he extended his hand. Vivian, a slender hand rested in his. She stepped out gracefully in a midnight blue gown that shimmered beneath the lights like a quiet night sky. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat. She was breathtaking, not because of the diamonds around her neck, not because of the designer gown, but because of the way she looked at the man waiting for her. There was warmth in her eyes, something no one had ever seen. From Vivian Lancaster, a reporter whispered, "Look at them." Another lowered his camera for a second. "I've photographed CEOs for 15 years. I'd never seen anyone look at another person like that." Julian noticed the chilly evening breeze. Without saying a word, he removed his suit jacket before Vivian could protest. He draped it over her shoulders. "You'll be cold." She looked at him. "And you?" "I'll survive." She smiled. "So will I." She tried to hand the jacket back. Julian simply looked at her. One look. No words. Vivian sighed with exaggerated resignation. "Fine." She kept the jacket on. The photographers captured every second. Inside the ballroom, whispers spread quickly. "So, the rumors are true. They're really in love." "I heard he stayed beside her every day while she was unconscious." "I heard she nearly dismissed a director for disrespecting him." Across the room, a young man in a navy suit watched quietly. Ethan Brooks, 32, founder of one of the country's fastest growing AI companies. Successful, handsome, single. He had admired Vivian for years. Tonight was supposed to be the night he finally asked her to dinner. He walked over with 2 glasses of champagne. "Vivian." She turned politely. "Mr. Brooks, I heard you've recovered." "I have. I'm glad." He smiled warmly. "I was wondering if before he could finish." Julian returned with sparkling water. He handed it directly to Vivian. "No alcohol." Ethan blinked. "You remember?" Julian answered. "Naturally. She's still recovering." Vivian accepted the glass without hesitation. Thank you. Ethan suddenly felt strangely unnecessary. Trying to recover, he smiled again. I was asking whether Ms. Lancaster would like to dance. Later, the ballroom orchestra had just begun playing. Many couples were already walking toward the dance floor. Julian remained silent. He simply lowered his eyes to the sparkling water in Vivian's hand. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He simply looked quieter. Too quiet. Vivian knew that expression. She had learned it over the past few weeks. Whenever Julian truly cared about something, he became silent. Ethan waited patiently. So Vivian looked from Ethan to Julian, then back again. Sorry. Ethan smiled politely. I understand. Another time. She shook her head. No. I'll dance with my husband. Ethan looked surprised. Oh. He forced a smile. Of course. As he walked away, he couldn't help glancing back once. Julian was still standing there. Expression calm. Almost too calm. Vivian watched Ethan disappear into the crowd. Then she turned toward Julian. You didn't say anything. I didn't need to. You weren't unhappy. I'm happy. You look unhappy. He looked away. I'm fine. She laughed softly. Mr. Hart. Are you jealous? He answered too quickly. No. She stepped a little closer. Really? Really? You didn't even look at Mr. Brooks. I did for half a second. That was enough. She couldn't help smiling. You're adorable. He looked genuinely offended. I'm 30. I know I'm not adorable. No. She tilted her head. My husband gets jealous. I do not. I like it. His ears turned slightly red. She almost laughed out loud. The music changed. A slower melody filled the ballroom. Vivian placed her untouched water on a nearby table. Then she extended one hand. Dance with me. Julian stared at it. I told you before. I don't dance. I remember. She waited. So neither do I. She smiled. Perfect. He sighed. I'll step on your feet. I'll forgive you. He finally took her hand. The ballroom seemed to notice. Immediately, people quietly moved aside. The orchestra continued playing. Neither Julian nor Vivian danced particularly well. In fact, they barely danced at all. He simply rested one hand lightly at her waist. She rested hers on his shoulder. They swayed gently to the music. Slowly, awkwardly, comfortably. Halfway through the song, Vivian whispered, You know, I wasn't lying. About what? I like it. What? When you get jealous. He lowered his voice. I'm not jealous. She smiled knowingly. Okay. A pause. You're protective. He looked into her eyes. That's true. Because you're my wife. Her heartbeat skipped. The words were simple, yet they landed somewhere deep inside her. Across the ballroom, several directors watched with disbelief. One muttered. She rejected Ethan Brooks. For him. Another shook his head. No, she didn't reject Brooks. She chose her husband. Meanwhile, Vivian's secretary, Lena, stood beside the dessert table, already texting another assistant. Update: CEO has rejected the city's most eligible bachelor. Reason: Mr. Vale exists. The reply came instantly. Expected. Back on the dance floor, Julian suddenly frowned. What? Your feet? She looked down without realizing it. She had been standing too long. Her recovering leg had begun trembling. Fine. He didn't argue. Instead, he bent down. Julian. Before she finished speaking, he lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Another Princess Carrie. In the middle of the ballroom, someone gasped. Someone started clapping. Someone actually whistled. Vivian hid her face against his shoulder. You promised you wouldn't embarrass me. I promised I'd take care of you. Everyone's watching. I know they're going to talk. I know. She peeked at him. You really don't care. He smiled faintly. I care. She blinked. About what? He adjusted his hold on her slightly, making sure she was comfortable. Then he answered quietly, I care that your legs hurt. Nothing else. For a long moment, Vivian simply looked at him. Then she wrapped one arm around his neck, very gently. So do I. So do you. What? I care about what? She smiled, eyes shining beneath the ballroom lights. That my husband is carrying me. The ballroom erupted into applause. Not because of the charity gala, not because of the music, but because everyone present had just witnessed something unexpectedly beautiful. A love that wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, wasn't performative. It simply looked effortless. As Julian carried Vivian away from the dance floor, she leaned close enough that only he could hear Mr. Hart hum, thank you for what? For always choosing me. Julian looked at her for a long second, then answered with a smile so gentle it made her heart ache. There was never anyone else to choose. Vivian lowered her eyes. For the first time that evening, she wondered how much longer could she keep the biggest secret of her heart. How much longer could she hide the little wooden box locked in the bottom drawer of her apartment? The box that had been waiting 7 years for Julian to open it. The charity gala ended just before 10 o'clock. By the time Julian and Vivian returned to Lancaster Group, most of the building was dark. Only the lights on the executive floor were still on. Julian looked at the clock in the elevator. You promised. Vivian pretended not to understand. I promise many things. You promise we go home. I only need 30 minutes. You said that an hour ago. She smiled innocently. Then I only need 20 now. Julian, you've been working since 7 this morning, and you've barely eaten. I had dessert. You stole one strawberry from my plate. It still counts. He looked at her quietly. It doesn't. The elevator doors opened. Vivian stepped out first. I'm just signing the cooperation agreement and then I'll come home. You promise? She raised her right hand. I promise. Julian finally nodded. I'll wait. 30 minutes became 1 hour. 1 hour became 2. By midnight, Julian was sitting alone in the executive lounge. A cup of coffee beside him had long gone cold. He glanced toward Vivian's office. The lights were still on. He stood. When he pushed the office door open, the room was silent. Documents covered the desk. The contract was finished. The laptop screen still glowed. Vivian, however, was no longer working. She had fallen asleep with her cheek resting on folded arms. A lock of hair covered part of her face. Even asleep, she looked tired. Julian's expression softened immediately. You never keep your promises. He walked over quietly as he reached to move her hair away from her face. His fingertips brushed her forehead. He stopped. Too warm. His eyes narrowed. Vivian. She didn't answer. He touched her forehead again. Definitely warm. He gently shook her shoulder. Vivian. Her eyelashes fluttered. You have a fever. I'm fine. You don't even know what day it is. She opened one eye lazily. Thursday. He blinked. She smiled weakly. I still know. Then she tried to stand the moment her feet touched the floor. She swayed. Julian caught her instantly. I said I was fine. No. His voice remained calm. But you're done pretending. She rested against him for just a second before trying to straighten again. I have a video conference with London in 15 minutes. No. I have to. No. She frowned. You can't cancel my schedule. I already did. She looked up. You what? I called Lena. You had no right. I know you. He bent down before she could finish. One smooth movement. He lifted her into his arms. Another Princess Carrie. She instinctively wrapped one arm around his neck. Julian. No. I haven't finished speaking. I know. Then why are you saying no? Because I know what you're going to say. She looked at him. And my answer is still no. Outside the office, Lena was waiting with a tablet in her hands. Mr. Hart, the London team is asking whether the meeting will be delayed. Julian didn't even slow down. It won't. Lena looked relieved. Great. It will be cancelled. She froze. Cancelled. For tonight. But the contract. It can wait. Lena hesitated. Mr. Hart. He finally stopped walking. His voice was quiet, yet every word carried unmistakable certainty. Nothing is more important than my wife. The hallway became completely silent. Even Vivian looked at him. She had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions. She had heard countless beautiful speeches from powerful men. None of them had affected her but this simple sentence. Nothing is more important than my wife. Somehow reached the place no business success ever could. Lena slowly nodded. Inform London. As she walked away, she opened the executive group chat. She typed only one line. Emergency meeting. Can lead. Reason. CEO caught a fever. Husband said she's more important than the contract. Replies flooded in. Immediately. Again. I'm starting to think Mr. Hart outranks all of us. Correction. He outranks the CEO. 20 minutes later, Julian drove them home. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Vivian leaned against the passenger seat with closed eyes. The heater filled the car with gentle warmth. At a red light, Julian glanced toward her. She had fallen asleep. He quietly turned the heater a little higher, then lowered the music until only the sound of rain remained. Halfway home, Vivian spoke without opening her eyes. You changed the temperature. You noticed. I always noticed. He smiled faintly. You were cold. So you remembered. I remember everything about you. The words escaped before he realized it. Silence followed. Then, Vivian slowly opened her eyes. Street lights reflected softly in them. You do? He nodded once. You hate cold coffee. You always read financial reports before bed. You pretend you don't like desserts. You forget lunch when you're busy. You fall asleep with a pen in your hand. And he glanced at her briefly before looking back at the road. You smile with your eyes before your lips. Vivian stared at him. You noticed that? I noticed a long time ago. She looked out the window, hiding the smile growing on her face. Outside, rain blurred the city lights. Inside the car, neither of them spoke again. Some silences didn't need words. Back at their apartment, Julian insisted she go straight to bed. I'm not tired. You fell asleep at your desk. I was resting my eyes. You were dreaming. Maybe a little. He handed her a thermometer. She accepted it obediently. 38.6. He read. She immediately reached for her phone. I should answer London's email. He calmly took the phone away. Julian. No. My phone. No. My company. No. She blinked. My husband is being unreasonable. Correct. She couldn't help laughing. I thought you were always gentle. I am. Then why are you so strict? Tonight? He walked into the kitchen. Because gentle people also know when to say no. Half an hour later, he returned with a bowl of hot chicken soup. The aroma filled the room. Vivian looked surprised. You cooked. I tried. She tasted one spoonful, then another. It's good. He looked skeptical. It needs more salt. It tastes perfect. You don't have a sense of taste right now. I have. Enough. She looked at him over the edge of the bowl. Because you made it. Julian looked away almost immediately. His ears had turned red again. Vivian smiled to herself. She had discovered something recently. The quickest way to make Julian blush was simply to tell him the truth. Near dawn, the fever finally began to fall. Vivian woke to find a blanket taut carefully around her shoulders. Julian was asleep in the armchair beside the bed. One hand still rested lightly on the mattress as if he had been checking her temperature, until exhaustion finally claimed him. She watched him quietly. The room was peaceful. No board meetings. No contracts. No reporters. Just the man who had stayed beside her through 3 months of silence, now sleeping because he had stayed awake for one feverish night. She reached out carefully. There. Fingertips touched. Julian stirred but didn't wake. A small smile appeared on Vivian's face. She whispered so softly that even the morning breeze almost carried the words away. I think I've made you wait long enough. Her gaze drifted toward the antique wooden cabinet across the room. Inside the bottom drawer, hidden beneath old documents, rested a small cedar box. A box that had remained unopened for 7 years. Inside it lay a faded library card, an old basketball ticket, a worn convenience store receipt, a graduation photograph, and one carefully folded umbrella. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she would finally let Julian discover the truth. That long before he believed he had fallen in love with her, she had already fallen in love with him. The fever was gone by morning. Sunlight poured through the floor to ceiling windows, painting the apartment in warm gold. Julian woke with a stiff neck. The first thing he did was look toward the bed. It was empty. His heartbeat jumped. Vivian, I'm here. Her voice drifted from the kitchen. Julian hurried over. Vivian stood in oversized home clothes that were obviously his. The sleeves covered half her hands. She was making coffee or trying to. The kitchen looked like a small disaster. Coffee beans covered the counter. Milk had somehow ended up on the floor. The coffee machine blinked an angry red warning light. Julian couldn't help smiling. I leave you alone for 10 minutes. She looked guilty for exactly 2 seconds. Your coffee machine doesn't like me. My coffee machine has excellent judgment. She narrowed her eyes. Mr. Hart. Are you teasing a patient again? No. You smiled. I did. So you admit it. I admit. You're adorable. She sighed dramatically. You've become very bold lately. I learned from my wife. She walked toward him, holding a slightly crooked ceramic mug. I made breakfast. He looked inside. The toast was unevenly toasted. The eggs were creatively shaped. The coffee was suspiciously pale. He looked back at her. You made all this? She nodded. I wanted to. You've never cooked before. I watched videos. How many? 23, he laughed. A real laugh. The kind that reached his eyes. I'll treasure this breakfast forever. You don't have to exaggerate. I'm not. He picked up the burnt toast first. Without hesitation, he took a bite. Vivian watched nervously. Well, he chewed thoughtfully. It's terrible. She stared. Then he smiled. And it's perfect. She hit his shoulder lightly. You scared me. I was telling the truth. She folded her arms. You really are impossible. So I've been told. But she looked at him with unmistakable softness. I'm glad you're impossible. That afternoon, Vivian asked Julian to accompany her somewhere. Where are we going? It's a surprise. Should I be worried? A little. They drove across the city until the skyline slowly disappeared behind rows of old trees. Eventually, the car stopped in front of an old university campus. Julian frowned. Westbridge University. Vivian nodded. He looked at her in surprise. You haven't been back. Not since graduation. Neither had she. They walked through the familiar stone gate together. Students hurried past with backpacks and coffee cups. Laughter echoed across the lawns. For a moment, 7 years disappeared. Julian smiled. I used to skip lunch to save money. I know. I worked at the bookstore over there. I know. I studied in the East Library every Friday. I know. He stopped walking. You know. She only smiled. Come with me. She led him toward the old library. Nothing had changed. The wooden tables, the tall windows, even the old clock still ticked above the entrance. Vivian stopped beside a table near the back. Do you remember this seat? Julian laughed. Of course. I practically lived here. He looked around. It always amazed me. What did no matter how early I arrived? The seat behind me was always occupied. Vivian looked at him quietly. Was it? He nodded. I never actually turned around. I figured someone else liked that spot. She laughed softly. They did. He looked puzzled. You? She nodded. I came every morning 20 minutes before you. His smile slowly disappeared. What? I wanted that seat so I could watch you. Silence. Julian thought he had misheard. You? She gently pulled a small key from her handbag. The key was old. Its brass surface had faded with time. I've wanted to show you something. That evening, they returned home. Instead of going upstairs, Vivian walked directly to the antique cabinet in the living room. She opened the bottom drawer, reached inside, and carefully lifted out a small cedar box. The wood had aged beautifully. It was obvious someone had taken great care of it. She placed it in Julian's hands. For me. For you? What? Is it my biggest secret? He looked at her. Vivian. She smiled nervously. For perhaps the first time since waking from her coma. The fearless CEO looked genuinely afraid. Open it. Julian slowly lifted the lid. Inside lay an old library card. His library card. He froze. Beneath it, a faded basketball game ticket. He remembered losing it after graduation. Below that, a convenience store receipt. The one from the rainy afternoon. His fingers trembled. Then he saw something else. A graduation photograph. The edges had become worn from years of handling. On the back, someone had written in elegant handwriting, "The boy who always smiles." After helping everyone else, Julian's breathing became uneven. Vivian. There's one more. She carefully unfolded a piece of blue fabric. An umbrella. Old. Slightly faded. But perfectly preserved. His eyes widened. The umbrella. The one I gave you. He looked at her in disbelief. You kept it. She laughed softly through tears beginning to gather in her eyes. You returned it. You left it with the campus security office. You never came back for it. So she lowered her eyes. I did. The room became impossibly quiet. Julian looked back into the box. Everything inside belonged to him. Everything. Every little thing. He had forgotten. She had remembered for 7 years. I don't understand. His voice was barely above a whisper. You barely knew me. Vivian shook her head. No. I knew you. You just never knew me. She sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap. Do you remember the little girl who fell off her bicycle outside the bookstore? Julian nodded. Immediately. I helped her. I know. I was across the street. She smiled sadly. Do You remember returning a lost wallet instead of keeping the cash? Yes. I. No. Do you remember buying two sandwiches? Because an elderly man said he hadn't eaten. I know. Each sentence landed more heavily than the last. Julian slowly turned toward her. You were there. I was always there. She laughed quietly. I don't think you ever looked up. I didn't blame you. She wiped away one escaping tear. You were busy chasing your dreams. And she looked at the umbrella between them. I was busy falling in love. Julian's eyes reened. I searched for you after graduation. She smiled. I know. I couldn't find you. I know. My phone number changed. I know. He stared at her. You knew everything. She nodded. I tried to find you, too. But you had already left the city. I searched for almost 3 years, and then she took a slow breath. My family arranged a marriage. He lowered his eyes. I thought I had already lost you. I almost said no. But then she laughed tears. I saw the name. Julian Hart. I thought, what if fate finally remembered me? She looked at him. So I signed. I didn't even care whether you loved me. I only cared that ID finally found you. Julian's vision blurred. So, when the accident happened, she nodded. I was angry, not because I was dying, but because I had finally found you and couldn't open my eyes. Her voice cracked. So, every night, I listened. I listened to you tell me about your first love. She laughed softly. I almost screamed. You idiot. You were talking about me. Tears rolled freely down Julian's face now. He reached for her without thinking. She met him halfway. They held each other tightly. No words, no explanations. Just 7 years of missed chances quietly melting away. After a long while, Julian whispered, You waited for me. She smiled against his shoulder. I look for you. I never stopped. He gently rested his forehead against hers. So, my first love. She nodded. Has always loved you. Back outside, rain began to fall just like it had 7 years ago. Julian looked toward the old umbrella resting on the table, then back at Vivian. He smiled through tears. I think we finally made it home. Vivian closed her eyes. Together. For the first time in 7 years. Neither of them had to keep searching anymore. 3 months later, Lancaster Group's Centennial Charity Gala became the biggest business event of the year. Unlike previous years, reporters were not only interested in billion-dollar projects, they all wanted to see one couple, the Ice Queen CEO, and the husband, who had quietly changed her world. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the ballroom was already filled with guests. Lena, now completely accustomed to being both executive secretary and unofficial relationship observer, stood near the entrance checking the schedule. A junior assistant hurried over. Ms. Lena, what is it? The chairman wants to know whether Mr. Hart has arrived. Lena smiled knowingly. If Mr. Hart is here. She glanced toward the entrance. Our CEO will appear exactly 30 seconds later. The assistant looked confused. How do you know? Lena laughed. Because that's what always happens. Almost as if on cue. The ballroom doors opened. Julian entered first. He still disliked unnecessary attention. His suit was elegant but understated. His expression remained calm. Yet nearly everyone in the room stood up to greet him. Not because he held a title, not because he owned shares, but because everyone knew one thing: if Julian walked in, Vivian would not be far behind. 20 seconds later, she appeared. This time she wasn't wearing the cold expression that had once made headlines. Instead, she was smiling. not for the cameras. 4. The man waiting beside the stage. She walked directly toward him without hesitation. She slipped her hand into his. A reporter whispered, "They don't even look around anymore." Another smiled. "They only look for each other." The evening passed quickly. Donations were announced. Scholarship programs were introduced. Young entrepreneurs received awards. Finally, the host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final interview tonight is with Lancaster Group CEO." Applause filled the ballroom. Vivian walked onto the stage. The spotlight followed her. She accepted the microphone with her usual confidence. The host smiled. "Miss Lancaster, everyone here knows your achievements, but tonight I'd like to ask something more personal." The audience immediately became interested. The host continued, "Over the past few months, the entire country has watched your recovery." And he smiled. "They've also watched your husband spoil you shamelessly." Laughter spread across the room. Julian rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Vivian looked toward him. A smile appeared in her eyes. The host asked, "So tell us, what has been the greatest investment of your life?" The ballroom became quiet. People expected many answers. Lancaster Group, technology, healthcare, artificial intelligence. Instead, Vivian looked directly at Julian without even a second of hesitation. She answered, "Marrying my husband." Silence, then thunderous applause. Some directors laughed. Several investors began clapping before anyone else. Lena quietly wiped away a tear. "I knew she'd say something like that." The host smiled. "That's a wonderful answer. So, let me ask another question. If life gave you another chance, would you marry him again?" Every camera immediately turned toward Vivian. She didn't think. She didn't pause. She smiled the same smile Julian had first seen on a rainy afternoon years ago. "I'd marry him earlier." The ballroom erupted. People stood. They applauded. Some even whistled. Julian looked at her as though the entire world had disappeared. Again, only she remained. The host laughed. "Mr. Vale, I think it's only fair we ask you the same question." Julian accepted the microphone. For a moment, he simply looked at Vivian. Then, he smiled warmly. Honestly, the kind of smile reserved for only one person. "I've been asked many times whether I regret marrying a woman who couldn't even open her eyes." The audience became quiet. Again. "I never did because even while she was sleeping, she was already the safest place I'd ever known." Vivian's eyes shimmered. Julian continued, "When I was 19, I thought one rainy afternoon changed my life because a beautiful girl lent me an umbrella." He looked at her. "Years later, I learned the truth. It wasn't the umbrella. It was her." His voice softened. "So, if I had another chance," he smiled, "I'd bring a bigger umbrella." For one heartbeat. No one in the ballroom understood. Then, Vivian laughed. A bright, tearful laugh. She covered her mouth, but tears still slipped down her cheeks. Only the two of them knew a bigger umbrella so they could stand beneath it together, without anyone getting left in the rain. The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation echoed through the ballroom. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, Julian and Vivian returned to Westbridge University. The campus was quiet. Rain had begun to fall again, just like 7 years before. They stood beneath the old tree beside the library. Julian opened a large black umbrella. This time it was big enough for both of them. Vivian looked up at him. "You remembered." "I remember everything about you." She smiled. "So do I." For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply listened to the rain. Finally, Julian reached into his coat pocket. What is it? A promise. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple platinum ring. Not extravagant. Not dazzling. Just elegant. Exactly like them. Vivian Lancaster. He took her hand gently. I married you once because I promised to protect you. He smiled. Today, I'd like to marry you again. Not because of a promise, but because every ordinary day with you has become the happiest day of my life. Her tears finally fell. Mr. Hart. No. He shook his head playfully. Tonight, just Julian. She laughed through her tears. Julian Chim. You once told me that I saved you. I did. She stepped closer until they were standing beneath the umbrella with almost no space between them. You were wrong. He looked at her curiously. She rested her forehead lightly against his. We saved each other. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain continued to fall around the umbrella. Warm lights from the old library reflected in the puddles. 7 years ago, two lonely young people had crossed paths beneath a storm. Neither knew that one small act of kindness would become the beginning of a lifetime. 7 years later, they no longer needed to search, no longer needed to wait, no longer needed to wonder whether they were loved, because home was no longer a place. It was a person, and they had finally found each other as they walked slowly through the rain, sharing one umbrella and one future. Julian quietly intertwined his fingers with Vivian's. She squeezed his hand once. He squeezed back. Neither of them let go again. That's all for today. Remember to subscribe and support us.